Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2004 sex comedy, A Dirty Shame. Now, this is one of those films that for many, many years was one of those movies that I had been searching for to add to my collection. And it was one of those things where I felt like it was a lost cause because I kept failing time and time again to find this movie, specifically the NC-17 cut, because I'd seen bits and pieces of this on Comedy Central when I was a teenager, the censor version, but it was something that's really stood out to me in terms of the scenes that I saw, and so I always wanted to like watch the movie in its entirety, but I didn't know there was an NC-17 cut, so when I found that out, I was like, "Well, I really wanna see that version," and I did actually finally find it earlier this year at a local record shop, and I had fun with this. I mean, I agree with Peter Travers, it's wicked, kinky fun. Now, does it have issues? Yes. I think there are some problems with the script. I do think that there are some jokes that are a bit lazy and kind of uninspired. But for the most part, I laughed a lot while watching this, which is what you are looking for out of a comedy. And when it comes to a John Waters film, I definitely feel that it had that sense of irreverence and over the top comedy that I look for out of a John Waters movie. So I think it was a good send off to John and his career. I know a lot of people disagree. They think it's a weak send off. I don't really feel that way. It's actually one of my favorite films of his. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on A Dirty Shame, I would like to give a special shout out to Brock for requesting yet another review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. Link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Dirty Shame is directed by John Waters, and I think he did a nice job. I think he did a good job directing this for what it is. It's another low budget independent film, and it still has that indie look and vibe to it. It doesn't look too slick or too polished. But it definitely does showcase the skills that John Waters has acquired throughout his long and illustrious career at this point. Um, the usage of camera angles, the usage of pans and zooms, it's all really effective, and definitely not something that feels like it's too sloppy. And I've seen people criticize the direction, and I really don't get it. I think his direction was really good in this. I don't think it was a problem. I don't think he did a bad job. I mean, there's even some moments in it, like when Ray Ray, the sex god, is walking around, and the whole town is becoming increasingly more and more sex crazed. All of these plants and all of this other stuff around the town is also becoming aroused, and the way that things were shot, it was very surreal. It was very intriguing, and in its some way, in its own way, kind of beautiful when it comes to the way that Sean Waters has shot stuff like a bush getting erect and a lot of his other crazy, wild stuff that's straight out of his imagination. And yeah, I think it was a film that definitely, in my opinion, stood out in a good way compared to other films in his filmography, because it does seem like, yeah, it's a lower budgeted film, but it also seemed like he had a bit of a budget to work with here. I mean, it cost 15 million, which is a decent amount of money for John Waters. He's used to making films for way cheaper than that. And so with more money to work with, he has more outrageous visuals and has a lot of stuff involving visual effects, which is not the kind of thing you normally see him work or usually implement into his films. So he actually showed that he could handle that well too, you know, like Sylvia's burning bush and all the stuff involving Ray Ray and his sex god powers. And yeah, I think that for the most part, it's a pretty fine looking film from a directorial standpoint. Now, the film is written by John Waters as well, and while I don't think that it's one of his best scripts, I still think it's a good screenplay. I think it's a solid mix of raunchy, over the top comedy and social satire. I think it definitely does lack character depth, but since it's a comedy, I can deal with that. But I can see why some people might have had a hard time with the movie because they have a hard time really getting into the characters because you don't really get to know that much about them despite their values and whether or not they like sex. But that's kind of the movie that it's trying to be. I think it's really not trying to be a film that is really attempting to try to be that deep. Yes, it does have some social commentary about conservative values and so on and so forth. But other than that, there's not a lot of depth to it. But I think that's fine because a lot of this film's enjoyment comes from just how irreverent and how outrageous it is and how it is completely willing to threaten the very limits of common decency. Now, on that note, the movie and its humor can definitely be a bit too one note at times. Like it's one gag that's just repeated over and over again. And the one gag is, oh, these people in this small town, they can't handle the very idea of sex. Let's shove it in their face in the most outrageous ways imaginable. And then let's see their reaction to it. Or we'll have people describe certain sex acts or talk about sex and do it over and over again. And it does get a little bit repetitive at points. There are some gags like the whole gay bears thing where they're just like, we're bears, grr. Like that was a little bit old and really wasn't that clever. It just felt like it was just a lazy throwaway gag. Even the sex addicts themselves, some of them were really not that funny. Like the police captain who likes to dress like a baby. Um, but there are still some genuine bright spots and some genuinely good things about this script. I like the idea of having the protagonist be this repressed a member of the neuters, this anti-sex group that lives in this small town. And I like the small town setting. I think that was definitely the right choice to have it take place in this fictional small town of Hartford Road. And having this clear divide between two different camps. So you have the neuters who are sexually repressed, who are very much almost puritanical in their values, and then you have the sex addicts, the perverts, who are just anything goes when it comes to sex. And having Sylvia Stickles, the protagonist, be a neuter, having her then through a concussion become a sex addict and become also enraptured and embroiled in this sex cult led by a literal sex god and Ray Ray. I think that was definitely a good choice. I also think it was a good choice writing wise to have her daughter Caprice be this over the top, over exaggerated sex figure herself and Ursula Utters with these Z cup sized tits. And so that leads to a moment when Sylvia, when she's awakened as this sex addict who is just obsessed with people yodeling in her canyon, so to speak. Um, they wind up having her have a heart to heart with her daughter, um, who is a sex addict, and it turns into like a genuinely heartwarming moment between the two, despite the fact that they're just talking about, being sex addicts. And I like the bits where you see Sylvia when she gets knocked in the head again and then is feeling remorseful and is wanting to rehabilitate herself from her sex addiction, and then it leads to some series of events that leads to Caprice also getting hit on the head, and then she becomes normal and is disgusted by her massive tits and everything, and is now super conservative to the extreme, and is hiding herself like she's some kind of Amish woman. And then she goes with her mother to this sex addicts anonymous meeting, and it's supposed to be this thing that's supposed to be very healing, but it's anything but, because there's a woman that's sitting next to them that's just constantly talking about masturbating in various different ways. And that character is then incorporated later on in the movie to hilarious fashion. But eventually, through some other random series of events, Sylvia gets hit in the head again, becomes a sex addict. Excuse me. For some reason, I cannot speak today. But she becomes a sex addict again, and then so does Caprice later on in the finale. So everyone is now able to be sex addicted and live happily ever after. But the way that people become sex addicts in this script, it got really old for me. Oh, they got hit on the head. And there's only so many different ways you can show people get hit on the head. And it just became predictable in that way. Oh, so and so is a sex addict now. Oh, they got hit in the head. And it's like, okay, a one time thing is okay. But every sex addict is just because they got hit on the head. Like, that was a bit lame to me. Like, I feel like there could have been a little bit more creativity when it comes to the different ways that people became sex addicts. And it's not just due to them being bonked on the head, or getting a concussion. I give John credit. He definitely did try to show people getting concussions in various different wild ways, but it's still people getting hit on the head. It also doesn't help that the final sex act that Sylvia is supposedly going to invent to bring about the sex erection is just them hitting themselves on the head. So it's like, okay, they hit themselves on the head and then they become sex addicts. If they get hit on the head again, they're no longer sex addicts. But if they hit themselves on the head, then again, by headbutting each other, then it's some new form of sex act that gives them like an oral orgasm, a spiritual orgasm that makes them float in the air. Like, I don't really get that. And I think it's just another like way for John to just throw in some slapstick, and that's fine. But for all of the buildup when it comes to this sex act, for it to just be that was definitely a bit of a letdown. But I definitely wasn't let down by the creativity and the imagination when it comes to the comedy. Like, other than maybe a couple moments when it was a bit repetitive, but other than that, like, I think there's some really creative ways that John describes different sex acts that's really funny. I think there's also a lot of really inspired satire when it comes to the conservative values and the conservative mindset. And there's some really funny lines in this. Like, there's a whole exchange between Sylvia and Caprice early on in the movie. and Sylvia's chastising her daughter for being put on house arrest for indecent exposure again. And she's talking about how she was drunk, and her daughter has this reply that just is really funny. I wasn't drunk. I was on pills. Like, it's messed up, but it's really, really funny to me. It's the whole idea that her daughter is not upset at the fact that she was caught for indecent exposure while under the influence. She's upset because she was accused of being drunk. It's just one of those things where she definitely doesn't have her priorities straight, and it's warped in a way that you can't help but laugh. Or like when the various different people in the town are talking about all these different things that the sex addicts are doing, and you have this pearl clutching townsperson who's all like, someone left a dildo in my bird bath. Or this other woman who's like, I am so Viagravated. My husband is on Viagra and he wants it every night. He has no right to be that hard. Just the way that these like staunchly conservative, pearl clutching old ladies are talking about dildos and all these different sex related things. It's really funny because it's such a hilarious contrast because their whole staunch values and them just being offended and aghast at having any of this be a part of their town, or them having to face it head on. And it leads to other stuff where they expose themselves in other ways. Like, I'm no prude. I married an Italian. Or it's diversity, not depravity. Uh, but yeah, there's just a lot of stuff in this that's very raunchy, very outrageous, and definitely offensive. I mean, there's a scene in a nursing home with Sylvia and a water bottle that is laugh out loud funny. But it's definitely something that I think would definitely make some people sick. Um, but despite a lot of that, I like the message of it. I like the fact that there's a good message in the end of, hey, it's okay to have sex. Sex is fun. You don't see a lot of that when it comes to films or just commentary in general. Or a lot of people have this whole, ooh, sex is, ooh, it's taboo. And I like that John Waters is like, no, it's not. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, shut up, you prudes. Like, get over it. Like, I like that. And I like the whole idea of like their horror story is what unfolds in this. Their small town, which is almost completely straight out of an Amish community, or at least it was, because we don't even talk about sex, let alone commit such acts. We want to become second virgins and get surgery, for the women, and to get their hymen put back together. And the end of the movie is their horror story. Like, the town gets taken over by a bunch of sex addicts and perverts. Like, first Hartford Road and then the world. Like, that is like a lot of people's horror story. Like, that's their nightmare. And so and there are some really surreal nightmare imagery in this, like bushes getting hard, a tree literally having a vagina in it, like all kinds of stuff that it definitely uh would throw some people for a loop. And I'm not a prude or conservative or staunchly uh against sex or anything, but even there were even some moments in this where I was like, that is just wild and that is insane. Uh, um, I mean, Johnny Knoxville having a literal snake pop out of his pants. and he starts, grabbing the head of the snake like it's his dick, or the end where he floats into the air and comes through the top of his head. Like that's an actual scene in this movie. That's actually how the movie ends, with Johnny Knoxville floating in the air after an oral orgasm and then just shooting cum through the top of his head, and then the cum splatters all over the camera. That's the end of this movie. So, um it's definitely a lot, but I think if you can deal with it, if you can deal with a lot of the just depravity, I think there's also a lot to like about this, and it's just fun. Sure, could it have been a little bit less crass? I mean, like David Hasselhoff taking a dump on an airplane and then his dump freezing in midair and then hitting Chris Isaak on the head and then making him a sex addict. Yeah, maybe that's a bit much. But I still appreciate the fact that John Waters was willing to go to places that he went with this, to go as far as he possibly could, at least with the NC-17 cut, which is the only version of the movie you should ever watch. Do not even bother watching, let alone picking up the R-rated version. It's a disgrace, because it just turns this outrageously funny movie, which is in a lot of ways as funny as it is because it's so outrageous, into something that's neutered and censored and not funny, because it just isn't going as far as it's supposed to. Um, I mean, it's a great example of censorship and how outrageous and stupid it can be. I mean, it could be a good example of that. I mean, it's so bad. Like, there's not only nudity that's censored in it with you know pixels, pixelation and stuff like that, but there's also like whole lines of dialogue that are cut out and other things. Like, it is an interesting exercise in censorship, but it's not good, and it definitely makes this film into something that is just no longer really worth its purpose. The whole point of it is that it's a dirty movie. Like, it's dirty, it's raunchy, it's kinky, it's wicked. Like, that's the whole point of it. You take away that nature, and then it's just normal, and that's not good. Like, that's not the kind of thing that works for John Waters or works for this, unless you're talking about Hairspray, which I also really enjoy, but that's a different kind of movie. And John wasn't trying to make that into some kind of raunchy movie. This is definitely trying to be something like that. So, yeah, it's a film that I'm not going to sit here and say that the script is spectacular, but I think it's solid for what it is. I really do. Now, the cast is another major plus for me when it comes to this movie. Tracey Ullman is the lead and Sylvia Stickles, and she is such a perfect fit for John Waters' style of comedy, and it's just so much fun to see her work with John. And the way that she seamlessly transitions from repressed, conservative Sylvia to I got the itch, sex addicted Sylvia is seamless, and it's really funny and hilarious. And Tracey Ullman, in my opinion, is just an amazingly talented actress and comedian. Her series Tracy Takes On is really funny. Features some really great acting by her. Um, Also, really like her stuff on the Tracey Ullman show that she did in the 80s. A show that nowadays has been overshadowed by The Simpsons because The Simpsons debuted on that show. But for whatever reason, her film career never really took off. So she did a lot of TV specials and TV stuff, and she's really done more of that than movies. But when she's given the opportunity, she can really shine, and she really does in this. Big reason why I like the film as much as I do is because of Tracey Ullman and her performance as Sylvia. Johnny Knoxville plays Ray Ray, the sex god, and he is also really good in it. Like, I never thought Johnny Knoxville and Sex God would really be something that fits, but it does. He's just having a blast being this horned up horn dog. And it's honestly one of my favorite roles of his too. Like, he's just enjoying it so much. Like, he's just having such a good time playing this over the top sex god. Selma Blair, she plays Caprice, and she's not in it a ton, but she definitely does make a big impression, to say the least. I mean, to be able to act in those giant, uncomfortable prosthetics, that says a lot. And her deadpan in this is really underrated. And I definitely do like her enthusiasm as well when it comes to her performance. Chris Isaak as Vaughn, Sylvia's husband, when he's letting loose at the end, once he's become a sex addict, he's not too bad. But when he's just trying to be the dopey goody two shoes type of guy, I don't know, really didn't do that much for me. Suzanne Shepherd as Big Ethel is hilarious. She steals every scene that she's in. I'm really glad that she decided to do the movie, even though she had a little, I wouldn't say a little issue. She had a pretty big issue with the film initially. She read the script, she didn't like it, thought it was too offensive, and she didn't want to do it. But then John Waters met with her, explained what his whole point of the film was, and then she agreed to do it. I'm really glad that she did, because this film was nowhere near as funny without her either. Like, she's just not gonna take any of this shit. Like, the way that she just calls everyone out and is just not afraid to do so, and is just very staunch in her convictions, is just really funny stuff. I mean, her deadpan is also up there with everyone else in the cast. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is when this raunchy, rowdy, just completely horned up old man walks up to her counter at the convenience store and essentially asks her for head, and she's like, "We don't have that," and just throws some coffee in his face. Uh, so yeah, she's great. Mink Stoll, who has been in a lot of other John Waters movies, she's also fantastic in this as Marge the Neuter. Like, the complete opposite of the kind of role that she. Well, no, she's played a lot of those kind of roles in John Waters films, but she's so good at it. And she is like the quintessential pearl clutching old lady. That's really what she is in this. Like, whenever I think of like the old lady clutching her pearls and be like, "Oh my god," like that's the performance I'm gonna think of. And her deadpan was just on point throughout the entire movie. You have Patty Hearst, who plays a character named Paige. You have Jackie Hoffman, who plays Dora. You've got Wes Johnson, who plays Fat Fuck Frank. Which, when I first heard that name, it completely killed me. Like, I was not expecting that at all, and then just randomly with a straight face, somebody mentions, "Oh yeah, you got some mail from Fat Fuck Frank." It was like, Fat Fuck Frank. That was funny. Um, you also have Paul DeBoy, who plays Wendell Doggett. Mary Vivian Pierce, who plays the non-judgmental ex-sex addict. I think I think that's the lady who was just, yeah, I think that's the actress who was trying to remember exactly who that was, but that might have been the one that was just completely just talking about like masturbating all the time and was just absolutely hilarious because she was just crossing the line constantly every scene that she was in. It got to the point where she's like trying to autoerotic asphyxiate herself with a payphone in one scene later on in the movie. Um, James Ranson, who plays Dingy Dave, Galen Alexander Connell, who plays the horny kid, Channing Wilroy, who plays the male motorist, and a bunch of other actors and actresses, including Ricky Lake, who has a cameo as herself. I think there's like a segment from the Ricky Lake show. And David Hasselhoff, the Hoff himself, has a cameo in this. But definitely the main standouts in this cast are Tracey Ullman, Johnny Knoxville, Selma Blair, and Suzanne Shepard, and Mink. The film also features some cinematography by Steve Gaynor. I think for the most part, it's pretty good, pretty decent, pretty strong work for this kind of movie. Definitely has a nice look to it. Um, don't really have much problems with the cinematography. The editing by Jeffrey Wolf I thought was wonderful. Another really great thing about this movie, because there's a lot of clever edits in this. It edits in a lot of different like footage from like old black and white movies and subliminal imagery. Let's say like horny or normal. And it does that every time that somebody gets hit on the head, specifically Sylvia or Caprice or some of the other characters. And so because of that, it just adds another nice, unique added touch to the film that really makes it stand out. I thought it was really cool the way that the film was edited with all those subliminal messages and the different footage and everything. The music by George S. Clinton, it's not some of his finest work, but it's fine. It's fine enough for the kind of entertainment that the movie is trying to be. But the music isn't really the biggest standout in terms of like the original score. It's the songs that are used in the soundtrack. They are really funny in terms of their placement. Like there were a lot of songs in this that are like old songs from back in the day when they couldn't really get away with saying certain things, so they just worked around it. So you have like the Pussycat song, which when you hear that now, you're like, wow, that is completely not at all subtle when it comes to what the song is about. And there's like the I-95 song, which I had never heard before. So when there's a scene at the bar and this song starts up, it just absolutely killed me. I thought it was really, really funny. Well, I was driving down I-95 the other night when somebody nearly cut me right off the road. I decided it wasn't going to do any good to get mad, so I wrote a song about him instead. It goes like this. Were you born an asshole, or did you work at it your whole life? Either way, it worked out fine, 'cause you're an asshole tonight. So yeah, nice usage and nice selection of songs for the soundtrack, and a good runtime. It's only like 89 minutes. Doesn't overstay its welcome, isn't too long, isn't too girthy, just the right size, just the right length. And yeah, ultimately I liked it for what it was. I wouldn't say it's a masterpiece, but I definitely think it's above average. I definitely think it's a lot better than it's given credit for. I do think it's a little underrated, especially when it comes to John Waters' filmography. I mean, I like this more than a handful of his earlier films. I don't like this as much as Hairspray or Serial Mom, but or Polyester, but I liked it more than some of his other films that are considered to be so much better. But that's just me personally. But yeah, if you're a fan of John Waters and you like raunchy sex comedies, this is definitely worth a watch sometime. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of A Dirty Shame. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.